My name is B. What brought me to England? Well, I came over here to England from Ghana after I got married to a British-born man, born and bred, to live in Redford. That was in 1972. And after 50 years, I still live here. I came with an open mind to start a new life, as my parents had advised me, having left my family back home. I felt lost and lonely, but I persevered. I found myself going to the Grove Methodist Church. I saw my family are Christians. I quickly settled in Redford and made friends in the church with the moms whose children went to the same school as mine. My husband worked in several locations overseas, and when we finally settled, I found some cleaning jobs to do, including delivering Royal Mail letters in Redford area. I'm well settled in Redford and would not like to move anywhere else. Thank you. Well, I brought some articles to be exhibited in the museum. When Kasia asked me, I was not sure, but I felt, yes, the things are hiding in the cupboard. I want to be seen. So I brought some of the things like kente cloth, which is beautiful, colorful things, and a headdress, and a broom, which we sweep the ground, in the house with. It serves as a hoover, and that sweeps better than a hoover, I will say. And a pot, which we cool water. You go and fetch water and put in the water in the pot, and it cools down. A day like this, it's beautiful to drink out of. And some beads, and many other bits and pieces which I can't, recall. And it's all in the museum here. Very fascinating and interesting things to look at.
I'm Kathy Cobra, and you might wonder why I'm Cobra, because that's like a snake, but it's not spelled that way. It's from my grandfather who lived in Scotland, and he had that name and passed it on, obviously, down the family. As I said, I am Canadian. Why am I living in Bassetlaw? Not too long a story, but I met up with a Scotsman, really, in Botswana, where I taught for 3 years, and he kind of persuaded me to come to Scotland. My grandfather is also responsible because he lived in Scotland, and therefore I could live and work in the UK because he was such a good guy. So coming to Bassetlaw has been an interesting experience, I think you would say. Many people probably don't even know where it is. But my husband got a job in Bassetlaw in 1996 when we actually moved to Redford, and obviously we've been here ever since. And for me it was, because my work is in dietetics and nutrition, I like to keep people healthy, and I was able to get work in Mansfield, in Bassetlaw, and freelance work was readily available in the area and around about. So I think Bassetlaw is great because it's on the train line, so you've got north-south connections, you've got east-west connections. Many people don't necessarily know about it, but it is, it's sort of a central part of the England. Although my preference would be to actually live in Canada, which is always will be home, and very special links with all of Canada, and it's a big country, as most of you will know, but I was able to live in different parts of it, so that gives you a good experience as well. And I was also very privileged to work in both Botswana and Zambia for a total of 5 years, and that was teaching in a secondary school. At that time they were taking teachers from overseas rather than using local teachers. And that was such an amazing experience. You can never replace reading about a country or its people unless you actually visit and stay there. And that to me has influenced a huge amount of what I do and I'm interested in doing, because I think people there were reasonably healthy in terms of what the food they had, but they were active. They ran to school every morning, and to me that was a real bonus. And I think I learned from that we are still a world together, but we certainly in certain parts of the developed world have exploited people in countries where they had a lot of things themselves, but developed countries went in and took food that they wanted rather than leaving it for them. And that got me interested in something called fair trade, which means that if you are making purchases, you should try and make sure that the foods you buy, when you can, have got a fair trade logo on it, because that means the people who produced it have got a fair price for their products. So you can see a fair amount of passions there. I think the bonus of being linked with Bassetlaw Museum has been when they organized the Wampanoag visitors and just last year, and it was a super experience to meet the people who'd come from the Massachusetts where they lived, and to explain to us the correct story about the Pilgrims, which we never really got here. It was people from here discovering America when actually there were a lot of people already living there. So I find the things that Bassetlaw does, and Bassetlaw Museum in particular, are they want to increase our knowledge about local things and about history, and also to highlight the really good quality and range of things that are available here in Bassetlaw, and the people who contribute a lot to Bassetlaw. And it's nice to think that our local museum and people involved in it are doing that. So I think we need to be aware of how much we have locally and the links that we have with other parts of the UK, as well as perhaps internationally. And the museum is a good means of doing that. And also I think talking to people. We have become kind of obsessed with computers and internet and things like that, when actually you sit down and talk to people, they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of information. And I'm fairly lucky that as soon as I open my mouth, people say, "Oh, you're not from here, are you?" So it introduces a conversation, and people are interested in why you have moved to Redford, which, as I've gone through, is a fairly long story. But I think the more we interact with people and find out how they're doing, what they're doing, is a very, very, very useful thing to do. And one other small thing I've been involved with is with the Quakers in Doncaster, who have been very good at welcoming asylum seekers and refugees coming to the UK, but are never given their status to stay here. And I've met a wonderful lady from the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo, who has been here for more than 3 years and still does not have her status approved to stay here. But what I've learned from her is just exceptionally positive, and we just talk and share ideas and things like that. So my thoughts on living in Bassetlaw or living anywhere is, what can you talk to people about? What can you share? Some things you've discovered, some things that maybe they don't know about. I mean, a lot of people don't even know where Little Gringley is, which is where I live, which is like a couple of kilometers from the center of Redford. People say, "Oh, where is that? I've never been there." So talking to people and just interacting and sharing ideas, stories, information is always the way we can learn. We can learn from books, we can learn from Wi-Fi and internet, and that's exciting too, but people our main source of learning and finding out about different parts of the world. Things that I've been here in Bassetlaw in the museum, really interesting wooden spoons that I collected when I was working in Zambia. Local people made them, and they would sit on the side of the road and sell them. So I've got many different shapes of spoons that were used by people who mainly made what we would call porridge, and that was their main source of food. And when I brought them home, my dad thought, ooh, we should have some way of displaying these spoons. So he really kindly made a stand, which will hang on the wall, and the spoons fit into it. And it's made from wood which was grown on our land, because I lived in a farm in Canada, and obviously we had a large woods that had loads of wood in it. And he was a very good carpenter. He used to make a lot of his own things. So having that here with me in Bassetlaw and being able to show other people, I find is really quite exciting, because it means a lot to me, and hopefully other people would think, oh, I wonder where those spoons came from, or where did she get that frame from that was made. So almost everything we do, I think, has got some sort of excitement or link in it. It's an interesting country to explore, because it's so big but so diverse, and I think a lot of people have not moved and lived in other parts of Canada, but it is like any country. If you move around and live in different parts of it, you actually learn a lot from it. Because obviously Nova Scotia, which is where I lived and worked for 5 years, has got, when you think of it, it's translated as New Scotland, so it has a lot of links with Scotland, where a lot of people came and moved to Nova Scotia and set up. In fact, they still speak Gaelic there and have a Gaelic college where people can learn to speak, which I think is really brilliant that they've done that. I mean, they do it in Scotland as well. They have Gaelic colleges, but this is back to linking our heritage and what we've learned and how we keep it going. We don't let it, filter out or die away. We say, it's good. We've got a lot to offer. We can keep it.
Well, my name's Derek Taylor, and my mum's story really starts over in Lancashire, where her great-great-great-grandfather worked at Agecroft Colliery, and at the end of one shift he was told that his next shift would be at Shire Oaks. And the family story is that they actually walked over the Pennines to start there. Mum lived in Shire Oaks all her life with her older brother Derek, and later moved to Worksop when she married my father. But my father's story is quite interesting. It's another family rumour that we've not been able to substantiate yet, that my grandmother, or great-grandmother, was in service with Queen Victoria and was in fact French. We quite enjoy that part of the story. The story continues that great-grandmother actually slept outside Queen Victoria's bedchamber at night, and that she married a beefeater, one of the yeoman wardens, and actually lived in the Tower of London. It would be lovely to substantiate such stories, wouldn't it? And then my grandmother, we know that she sewed fabric on aircraft in World War I down in Hampshire. So that begs the question, how did she get to Hampshire and back to Nottinghamshire all those years ago, 1914, 1918? Again, we don't know where we come from, do we?
Hello, my name is Christopher, and I'm going to tell the story of my grandfather, who was called Frederick William Trend. He was born in Holborn, London back in 1896, and was the son of quite a wealthy tailor. During the First World War, he was called up to the City of London Regiment and saw service in Gallipoli and also at the Somme, where he received injuries. After that time, he decided to join the newly founded Royal Air Force, and was sent up here to Ramby, where the pilots were being trained, ready for service if the war had continued. And it was during this time at Ramby that he met my grandmother, Ethel May Saxby, who is a local girl. From what we can tell, it seems to have been a bit of a whirlwind romance, because they married just the day after Armistice Day at St Swithin's Church on sort of November the 12th, 1918. And he then went to live with the rest of the Saxby family at 52 Grove Street, which is now demolished, but used to be right next to where the St Swithin's School is. He began working, as far as we can tell, as again a tailor, the family business, and had a job at Cole Brothers in Sheffield. And he was certainly there, we know, in 1921, because we picked that up from the census, whereas my grandmother stayed at home and was housekeeping alongside my great-grandmother. In 1924 they had a son, my father, and then they moved to Leicester for a short while. Sadly, as far as we can tell, things may not have been all that well with the marriage, because within a couple of years my grandmother was back home at Grove Street with my then 2-year-old dad. It appears from photographs and what we can find out that my grandfather did visit quite regularly, so he's kept contact with my grandmother and his son, but that tended to be rather sporadic. And sadly, in the mid-1930s, my grandmother gave birth to 2 twin girls who were his daughters. They only lived for 3 hours, sadly, and the result of complications of the birth led to the death of my grandmother at Jessop's Hospital in Sheffield. So my dad was brought up by the rest of the Saxbys. And it also seems to be around then that the family totally lost contact with my grandfather. We know he stayed in Leicester and particularly in Loughborough, and he remarried and had a family of his own because he had another son, and then he died in 1950. So that was a very sort of sporadic time from what we've been able to find out, usually from trying to work out old photos and the things that my granddad had left for my father, which has been passed on to me. There was thoughts that grandfather and grandma might have been trying to get back together. There's some evidence of that from about 1934, but I think her death a year later sort of put an end to that. And that was the last time that my dad ever saw his father and my grandfather. For myself, again, sort of probably followed a similar sense in that, although I'm Redford born and live in Redford, a fair chunk of my life I've not really had that much to do with it apart from sort of visiting parents. I was born at Worksop and we went to live at 22 Humber Street, which is a little terraced house, and I was there for the first 2.5 years of my life. Then my dad, who had followed his grandfather in the family business into being a draper and a linen salesman, got a job up in Huddersfield. We moved to a little village called Homley in last of the summer wine country, and I certainly remember that time as being a sort of very happy time. Although it was such a small village, but it was sort of very friendly, and it was a great place to spend the early part of the childhood. He then moved, as part of his job he got promoted, and we ended up moving over to a place called Rastrick nearby, and Dad at that time had become the manager of the toy department for the co-op in Brighouse, which as a child you can imagine was really great for me, because you used to get all these toys, some of which were sort of first off the line, some of which are quite rare because they were only made for a while and then discontinued, and I still have 1 or 2 of those at home. We moved back to Redford when I was 11, just in time for me to start at the King Edward VI Grammar School. My dad by then had got a job down in Newark as the manager of Newark Cattle Market, and so my teens were certainly spent in Redford. When I was 18, I went to college at Hull College of Higher Education to study a degree in business, Managed to graduate slap bang in the middle of the 1979 to 1981 recession. So there's absolutely nothing locally for me to get a job in. I did look around Sheffield, and unfortunately Sheffield at that time was seeing factories being closed and businesses in trouble. So there's nothing for me there. So I ended up working down in London, originally as an accountant with British Telecom. I lived at the Barbican YMCA, which meant I was in central London, round the Holborn area, and I often used to drink at a pub called the Princess Louise, which is still there, which is an old Victorian pub which looks very much as it would have done when it was first built. It's also very close to where my great-grandfather had his shop and where Grandad would have been born. And I often thought, you know, perhaps the family who lived around there used to perhaps drink there. And I would imagine if they were still around and walked in, they'd probably see a lot that was still the same from what they knew in their day. I stayed in London for about 10 years as an accountant, and then working with Lloyd's Register of Shipping, I moved up to Coventry to help run the accounts department in their new office there. And it was that time that I decided to follow what was really my childhood dream and become a teacher. So I retrained as a teacher. Again, nothing in this area whatsoever. I did visit Redford regularly because my parents and family are here, so I used to come certainly at least once a month to see them. But work-wise, I went to Lowestoft on the Suffolk coast, and after a spell at Lowestoft College, I got a job in middle school and started to work more and more with primary age children, which I really enjoyed. Again, sort of change of contract meant there was nothing for me in Lowestoft. So my final teaching post was in a little town called Tring in Hertfordshire, not too far away from Aylesbury, and that's where I spent the last 6 or so years of my teaching life. Sadly, like a lot of teachers, I fell ill and decided that for the sake of my health, it'd probably be best to leave full-time teaching. And also at the time, sort of Dad, who was still around, was ill, and Mum was starting to show early signs of dementia, so I decided to move back to Redford and stayed at the family home on Pennington Walk, really until after my dad passed, and for quite a few years until my mum had to go into a care home. It's about that time that I then was offered a cottage at Trinity Hospital, and so I became one of the brethren who lives there, and I'm still there now. So it's a story really of beginning in Redford, going away, and then sort of coming back again. And I've probably now, as I approach old age, probably spent more time in Redford than I ever did when I was younger. But we've always had these connections between London and here, and also with our local family, the Saxbys, as well. So there's been quite a mixture, within our family group as to where people have come from and how people have moved around and ended up within Redford.
My name is Anne, and we moved from Oxfordshire, a small village there, to Bassetlaw in 1981. I was told it was only for 2 years, but things changed out very differently. And my husband had been posted up to Finningley. The arrangement was that he was going to what they call beansteal, which was to live in the mess during the week and to come home at weekends while I stayed in Oxfordshire with the children. A wonderful arrangement. Sadly, after 1 week, Chris decided that living in the mess was not for him, and so it was decided that we would move up here. I was not very happy. We looked around for ages for a house, and on the last day where we could actually buy a house, which before having to move out or having to go into quarters, we were taken by the estate agent to look at this last new house on one of 7 in Everton. By this time we were very fed up, and we decided that this house would just have to do. It was only for 2 years, I was promised, so this house we bought and called it It'll Do. We eventually moved in on a bank holiday Sunday. We arrived in Pine Close at 7 o'clock in the morning. with 2 cars, 2 children, 2 dogs, 2 cats and 2 gerbils. I don't think people really realised what had hit them. Very quickly after we started unloading, my son found a mate across the road and disappeared for the day. And shortly after that, our daughter was taken off to help make costumes for the floats the next day in the village. They had a wonderful day. We really realised what wonderful neighbours we had on that day, and that things were going to be okay, I hoped. Eventually the children went back to school and Chris went back to work, and I really wondered how I was going to cope in this village. But Everton absorbs people. It makes people very happy and cared for, and there's a lot going on. We've now been here for 40 years. I've loved every minute of it. I know Chris only said it was for 2 years, but I haven't dared to ask him which 2 years he had in mind, because I don't really want to know. In the end, something that I didn't want to happen has been wonderful. The item that I've brought in, the object from where we used to live, is a watercolour of the church where my husband was the church warden for many years. He made the mistake of going to the annual church meeting and not concentrating, and suddenly found he was just a church warden again. But I think he really enjoyed it.
Hello, my name is Ramona, and I'm very happy to take part in this moving story exhibition. I am originally from Romania, and I moved in Redford last year in December. And I'm here to tell you my story about how this happened. Okay, so I lived in London for many years, about 14 years, and then because I always wanted to have my own house in the UK, I paid 14 years rent, and then I realized that this is wasted money, so I need my own place, and I decided to do this. But it wasn't very easy, as the prices in London are very high, so you can't really afford, especially as a single mom with 2 boys, 2 children. It was almost impossible. So I started looking for alternatives to this dream of mine, and I think one of the alternatives was to relocate, like look in a different area where I can afford. So I started looking more north, Peterborough, then King's Lynn, then Redford, Sheffield, Huntington, Allerton, everywhere basically, until I came to Redford to see this house I live in at the moment. And it was love at first sight. It gave me a very, very good vibes and very good mood. Being in the house and looking around, it was the perfect house, to be honest. And yeah, I decided to make an offer. I think the week after seeing the house, I made an offer, and the lady agreed my offer. And then it took a bit longer because I had 3 mortgage. I had to apply for my mortgage 3 times, as the first 2 times was rejected. Due to my the new contract I have with the new job, and as being a factor of risk, being a single mom, and yeah, they said I can't really afford to pay that much, but I was paying more for rent, but thanks. So the lady accepted my offer, and she, God bless her, she was a very nice lady. She had to wait for me because that was in July when I made the offer, the end of July last year. Yeah, it's nearly 1 year in July. And I made the offer, she accepted, and she had to wait for me until December 2021 last year. So I think I was lucky she sold the house to me, and she waited for me for so many months. And then it was the same thing with the job in Doncaster. As I applied for the job in no, in August, the end of August, and they waited for me until January 2022. It was the same thing. So I think Redford wanted me, the town Redford wanted me to be here. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about my background. I graduated the University of Agriculture in Romania in 2006, and I wasn't offered a job that I will make me afford to have a good life in Romania. So in the same year, 2006, I decided with my best friend to come here, and with the au pair visa for with the au pair visa to live with a British family and look after the children, and also improve our English. So I came here, lived with them. I also studied English for 1 year at the Newbury College. And after this 1 year, I decided to come to London because I met my ex-husband and we decided to move together. And yeah, life in London is very expensive, as I said. So this brings me here. And also regarding the object I provided for the exhibition, it's from my father, and he gave it to me on my wedding day in 2010. It is the only jewelry I have from him, and he gave it to me in my wedding day, so that's even more important to me. And also because I had my wedding in 2010 in May, and the same year in October 2010 he passed away because he was very sick. So this gives me a very good memory of him having this ring. That's why I wanted to share it with you and give it for the exhibition. Also, my mother passed away in 2009, which is 1 year before my dad, and she wasn't with me in my wedding day, but she was in my memory. Actually, I know she was with me, even if she wasn't physically there. But I'm very happy my father was there for me. I want to say something about Redford. First time I came to see the house, and we had some spare time, so we had a look around. We went around the town center, around the canal, and to see a bit the town. And I was very impressed. To be honest, I was very, very impressed, and my children are very impressed about the canal and about all the wildlife, about the gardens, about everything that's around the canal and around Redford, and also King's Park. It's like an amazing park, like amazing park. I had to take pictures of every corner of it because I really love it, and the flowers are so beautiful, and the canal passing exactly to the middle of the park. Yeah, that's really, really amazing. And also because it's the market, I really enjoyed the market. I went with my boys a few times, and they really enjoyed the market. They were just like stay around and like look around at the people and what they sell, and they find it very, very, very interesting. Also, there was a restaurant at the back of the market, Spencer something, but it closed unfortunately, and I couldn't take them there. I went there with my best friend when we came to see the house. We had breakfast there, but then I was going to take my children, and I didn't take them because the restaurant closed. But it was like an amazing, gave me a very, very good vibes, and yeah, very good vibes about the town, and very good memories as well, because I felt very special coming. I felt like in holiday, to be honest. Thank you. It was a real pleasure to be part of this, even if I'm very nervous in front of the camera, but I've done my best. Thank you.
My name is Maria Paula, and most people just call me Maria, but that's another story that goes back to my childhood. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my parents and how they came to live in Redford. My dad was born Dimitrov Babichuk, and he was born in what he said was 1915 in Ukraine. We're not too sure that that date is accurate, but that's the one he gave us. My dad was one of several children. I think he had 4 siblings, 2 sisters, one named Maria, Halfia, and 2 brothers, Peter and Basil. Oh, and another one, Misha, Michael. So he was one of 6 children, and he lived quite happily on the family farm, farming the land, which he loved very, very much. And he did that all of his life until the Second World War came along. And at different times, he was held captive by Polish, German and Russians, and then ended up in a German prisoner of war camp. He became a displaced person when that was liberated after the war, and this was in Germany. Now, my dad asked to go to Canada or to America, but I think it was one of the British soldiers there said to him, look, you're better off going to Britain. You can have a really lovely life in Britain, so why don't you go there? So he said, okay, you know what, I'll go. He really desperately wanted to go back to Ukraine, but he couldn't because he feared that the Soviets, the Russians, would kill him or make his family suffer. The reason the Russians could have done this is because my dad was a prisoner of war held by the Nazis, and Russia saw that as him, as all prisoners, collaborating with the Germans, which they didn't. I mean, they were slaves throughout the war, throughout the time they were held captive. So my dad ended up coming to Britain after the war, Second World War. Around the same time, a little bit later, my mum, she was one of 11 children, of which only 5 survived, her and 4 sisters. And she was born in Foggia in Italy, but her parents both sadly died within a few weeks of each other when my mum was only 4. And she and her sisters were sent to an orphanage. There was the eldest sister Ninetta, Lena, and then a younger sister, Asuntina. So there were 3 surviving sisters plus her. And life was hard in the orphanage. They were woken up very, very early by the nuns to go and do the laundry. You can imagine a young 4-year-old child helping to wash laundry like 6 o'clock in the morning and scrubbing all of these sheets, all of the town's sheets, because the orphanages did the laundry for the town and the city. Anyway, she got older, she got to 14, and she was sent to a family, a lady called Dora, who I became to know as Auntie Dora later. And my mum was their nanny, looking after Auntie Dora's 4 children. And my mum was very happy there, but eventually her sister Lena came to her and said, look, it's time for you to come with me now. So she took her off to Rome, and my mum became a nurse in Rome, and which she was very, very happy there. And one day their uncle, who had taken the youngest sister from a child, he didn't take the others, he said to her, he came along and he said, Rosaria, her name was Rosaria Nuzziello, Rosaria, how would you fancy going to England to work? And she flippantly said, yes, okay. A few weeks later, he turned up with the tickets for the boat and he said, right, you're going. She had quite a happy life in Rome as a nurse, but her uncle said, no, you will go to England. So she got on the boat and over she came to England, and she lived in Keighley in Nottinghamshire, in Yorkshire. And she worked in a mill. She was quite happy there, working with other ladies on clothing, mending. She mended fabric on great big machines, and she loved it. This is a picture of my mum whilst she was in Keighley. That's my mum. She was only 4'8". She eventually shrank to 4'6" in older age. She was playing the part of a man on stage, all of the Italian ladies that were in the hostel there at the Robert Clough Mills, they all put on a show. And she was very, very happy. At the same time, my dad, once he came to England, he was at, I think it was Moreton Grange Moreton Grange Farms, Joseph Cam Farms, and he was working on there, and they had trips out, and that's my dad on a day trip to Scarborough, looking very, very glam in a posh car. It wasn't his. It must have been something they just had photographs of. So that was them. And then one day, my dad, for some reason, ended up going to Keighley for a dance. Long way to go for a dance from Redford, yeah? But he did. And he was going to find a wife. Well, he did. He met my mum. And that's them cutting the cake, their wedding cake. They met. They very quickly became engaged, and I think it was in 3 months they were married. So that's my mum and dad cutting the cake, and that's them together on the chair. Mum and dad looking very dapper. And then 9 months later, I came along, and there I am with my mum in the back garden. My dad, he'd bought a house. After coming to England, he had to stay on the farm, Joseph Cam Farms, for 2 years and sign in at a police station, as people that came over from Ukraine had to do. So he had to sign at a police station every week, but after 2 years he could buy his own house. So my mum and dad met, married, moved into my dad's house, and that was on Jubilee Road in Redford. They had me, and then 3 years later they had my brother. So that's me and my brother, Franco Marison. And they were quite happy. But can you imagine a Ukrainian and Italian? Neither of them spoke English when they came to England. And I think as I was growing up, I never knew whether I was speaking Ukrainian, Italian or English. It just all came naturally. I've forgotten a lot of the Ukrainian, but it was so lovely. But can you imagine how they communicated in the early days when they couldn't speak English? They did both speak English and read English too, eventually. 25 years later, I made my mum and dad a 3-tier wedding cake with some of the decorations that were on their original wedding cake. My dad worked at the rubber factory, and my mum brought me and my brother up. Excuse me. When I was 14, my mum got a part-time job at the White Hart, cleaning the White Hart. Lovely, lovely people, both of them, both very generous. And my mum was kind of the mum that everyone dreams of. I think we were very fortunate. My dad was very self-sufficient. He could go and grow anything. He had 2 allotments. There wasn't a weed in sight, which I was always amazed by. But looking back now, reflecting, I think when he was captured as a slave for the Nazis, he was made to work in what they called nurseries, and that would have been gardening. So I imagine that's where he got to the point where he made sure everything was immaculate. I don't know, my dad really loved gardening. I went on to have 3 children, Jamie, Christian and Joseph. They're all grown men now. And my mum and dad were crazy about the children. They loved their grandchildren. My mum liked to do a lot of knitting, especially when my dad was at the allotment. I don't know how she had time, because not only did she have me and my brother, who were now adults, spent a lot of time with her, but she had 3 grandchildren. You see, they're all in matching jumpers and baby grows that my mum knitted. She also used to crochet blankets. We used to love going over there. Whenever you see my mum in a picture, she's always in an apron. She always wore an apron. She was brilliant at baking, at cooking, at everything. But she loved her grandchildren. Excuse me. Just a few months before my mum passed away, she said to me she was afraid she'd never get to see her next grandson, my brother's child, Damon, that was born, and she did just pass away a few weeks before he was born. But she said, make sure you tell Damon I love him. Both my dad died 3 years after my mum, but really we say that he passed away when my mum did, because he stopped living. he just missed her that much. Sorry. So this love story that started in two separate countries, Ukraine and Italy, and brought together in England, is quite fascinating, quite amazing. And I'm sorry that my parents went through really hard times. But had they not, then me, my brother and our children, and now my grandchildren, wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. So I'm forever thankful and grateful. And we're only just finding out about things that are happening now, that happened years ago as well, with what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. But I feel very fortunate because I've got an Italian background and a Ukrainian background. And so I feel very fortunate and brought up in England, you know, 3 cultures. I'm very happy for that. So that's my mum and dad. They loved England. They loved Redford. They absolutely loved it. I often asked, why don't you move elsewhere as I was growing up? They're like, no, we love Redford. There's everything. There's a beautiful park. We spent lots of happy times at the park. Lovely people. There's a train station so you can travel around. But yes, that's my mum and dad. Thank you very much.
Do you like going to the American side of Czechoslovakia? They give you the whole Polish, before the Polish office. The Polish office is 6 in the morning, going to Poland train, at this to American side, going to 6 evening, 6. Oh, it changed, so it morning? No, American side is going to 6. This whole day and they hide it down, they're waiting. You hid on the American side? That's American. Oh, you went into Polish office and hid? Where did you hide? What? Just hide it in the station. In the station? And then when the Americans came? The Americans train came in office. Oh, in train? Train after going to this. 20 people have been there and they went. Did you get caught? No. And where did you go on the train then? We went to Pilgrims across to the road, and after they crossed the road, going through this. To Polish army, you know.
How did you get over to England?
From Polish army?
No, what, they sent you across, or?
No, that's all together. Finish army, to the Polish corps, and finish after going to this.
So did you get road over?
To